Good evening, Rowan. It's the 25th of January 2016 and it's just after midnight, and I'm making you my usual video after the weekend to reassure you that I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend, and even if I had been, they wouldn't be people pretending to be astrophysicists or members of the House of Lords. Anyway, I thought we could carry on with our little chat this evening about the bizarre lecture that you gave at the Royal College of Medicine on the 21st of July 2015, entitled Sex, Sexuality and Well-Being. So here's something else that you said. So I suppose one of the questions that we're always bound at some point to be asking when thinking about sexuality and sexual well-being is, with any sexual activity, is what do I mean by this? What do I actually want to say? You can imagine a somewhat cynical respondent saying, what I want to say is that I want sexual pleasure, and that's it. But the fact is that there is, as I've suggested, no way of completely disentangling what we do with another person from those issues around power and therefore meaning. So I'm just going to comment on this last thing that you said first, that a cynical respondent might say, what I want to say is that I want sexual pleasure and that's it. But the fact is, there is, as I've suggested, no way of completely disentangling what we do with another person from those issues around power and therefore meaning. Well, I think you're globalising your own experience here and your own attitude. Because if a person simply wants sexual pleasure and meets another person who simply wants sexual pleasure, and this is out in the open and they know that there's no other agenda, then power doesn't really come into it, because they're both making an informed decision and they're both clear about what they want the outcome of this sexual activity to be. And I think the thing that you don't understand, if a person simply wants sexual pleasure and they approach another person and that person refuses them, then they'll take no for an answer. They'll go and find someone else who's interested in them, who wants to have sex with them. Whereas if you bring power into the equation, which is what you do, because you don't simply want sex with people, do you? You want to be in control of them. So you're not just looking for sexual pleasure, because if you were, and the person you'd approach wasn't interested, then you'd just leave it and find somebody else. But because it's a power issue with you, you can't stand anyone refusing you, and that's why you've hounded me around the country and made up a pack of lies behind my back, because you didn't simply want sexual pleasure, you wanted to control me, and that's why you wouldn't take no for an answer, and why it was such an insult to you when I refused you. In fact, I don't even think that you realised I was refusing you. I think you didn't realise I even knew that you were propositioning me, because you're so egotistical. You probably couldn't believe that anyone would want to refuse you, being so gorgeous as you are. And irresistible. So it's really an issue of power with you. You are very lustful, but with you the lust for sex and sexual pleasure is intertwined with the lust for power as well. It's not called lust for power for no reason. So you were lusting for me in a sexual way, and you were lusting to have power over me and to control me as well, which is why you couldn't take no for an answer, and you became so obsessed and went around the country hounding me everywhere, getting other people to hound me and trying to destroy me, because you simply couldn't face the fact that I just didn't want you for whatever reason. So let's look now at the first part of this statement that you made. So I suppose one of the questions that we're always bound at some point to be asking when thinking about sexuality and sexual well-being is, with any sexual activity, is what do I mean by this? What do I actually want to say? Well, the thing is, Rowan, I don't care what you meant by it. I don't care what you wanted to say, because I wasn't interested in you at all, and probably I'm speaking for other people as well who haven't been interested in you, or who aren't interested in other people who've expressed an interest in them. What do I actually want to say? What do I mean? Well, what you meant in relation to me was, you belong to me and I'll do whatever I want with you, and I'll destroy you if you don't go along with my wishes. I'm in charge and you belong to me. That's what you meant. But this is another instance of you redefining morality, and I don't just mean traditional morality like Christian morality. I mean generally accepted cultural morality and what is legal in Britain, that you're not allowed to force yourself on someone in a sexual way. The person has to be of age and they have to consent, and you have to be in private. So that's the law in Britain. It's not even Christian sexual morality that I'm talking about. It's generally accepted cultural norms and the law of the land, that you can't force yourself on somebody. They have to be consenting. So what you mean when you say this, what do I mean by this, and what do I actually want to say? You're redefining every sort of sexual morality, really, so that you can define yourself as a moral person. This is why you redefine these things. So I'm going to make another quotation of something that you said to illustrate this point, and it's in an essay that you wrote called "Is There a Christian Sexual Ethic?" And you said, "Our main question about how to lead our sexual lives should be neither am I keeping the rules nor am I being sincere and non-hurtful, but how much am I prepared for this to signify?" So, well, am I keeping the rules in relation to traditional Christian morality? This is what you're referring to. This is your very psychopathic worldview, really, because as I've said before, if you love someone, then you want to act in a way that's pleasing to them, and so this relates to God as well. If you love God, then you want to act in a way that's pleasing to God. So you're not frantically thinking to yourself, am I keeping the rules? Just as if you were living with your husband or wife and you loved that person and you weren't a psychopath like you are, you wouldn't be frantically thinking, am I keeping all the house rules? You would be thinking, perhaps even instinctively thinking, that you wanted to behave in a way that was pleasing to your spouse. And so the same in relation to God, that you would, if you love God, you want to act in a way that's pleasing to God. So you're not frantically thinking, am I keeping the rules? So you've created a false dichotomy anyway. So you state that you shouldn't be thinking either, am I keeping the rules, nor am I being sincere and non-hurtful. So this is a more liberal attitude to sexual morality that is in tune with cultural values and with British law, that you can't force yourself on someone really, and you would, I guess, want to be honest with them as well. If you didn't want a relationship with them, you just wanted sex, you'd have to be honest with the person about that as well. This is a bit further than just keeping the law. So am I being sincere and non-hurtful would be a more liberal view. But you don't go along with either of these views, which have consideration for the other person. You don't go along with either of these things. you've redefined morality to say it's not am I keeping the rules or am I being sincere and non-hurtful, but how much am I prepared for this to signify? So you've redefined this to categorise yourself as a moral person when you know perfectly well that you're not a moral person, but for some mysterious reason it's very essential for you to think of yourself as moral and to think of yourself as a Christian and to define yourself that way, even though neither of these things are true. You're not a Christian and you're amoral. So you've redefined every kind of morality in relation to sexual behaviour and redefined it as how much am I prepared for this to signify. So if you take this to the logical conclusion, how much am I prepared for this to signify, this sexual act? Well, this makes rape a moral act then, doesn't it? As long as it signifies something, preferably something very important, very great, to the perpetrator of the sexual violence, then that makes it a moral act. So all your sexual harassment and abuse suddenly becomes moral because it signifies something to you. So you can continue to see yourself as a moral person in your eyes. And I am going to play a clip where someone else comments on this statement of yours in relation to your general attitude towards Christian doctrine and Christian ethics. And I'll play that now.
And my proposal is that he offers what I've designated as a shadow gospel, something which bears a resemblance to the real thing, but is no more than what Samuel Johnson, in his great dictionary of the English language, described as an imperfect and faint representation opposed to substance. Opposed to substance. And this brings out both the subtlety and the seriousness of what we're dealing with. It looks like the real thing, but it is actually opposed to it. And the avoidance of closure that we might otherwise dismiss as perhaps just the prevarication of an academically minded archbishop, or perhaps less kindly as mere ecclesio-political opportunism in the light of the steady exodus from the Anglican Communion Standing Committee last year, is actually in the writings of Dr. Williams the expression of a sophisticated theology. Moreover, what makes Dr. Williams to me so interesting is, from a diagnostic point of view, is that for him the need to live with contradiction is a personal as well as an institutional necessity. It seems clear that in 2002 his record as a leading advocate of the gay-lesbian agenda did strengthen his case for appointment as Archbishop with the metropolitan establishment in London. But of course that risked alienating not only the Orthodox in England, but also Anglicanism's numerical centre of gravity in the global south. And the new Archbishop responded to that tension by internalising it. He committed himself to recognising official Anglican teaching on sexuality as set out in Resolution 110 in his official capacity, while in a personal capacity he refused to renounce his opposition to that teaching. So at the most senior level of the communion, there was established what one of Dr. Williams' liberal critics has called a form of false consciousness, in which institutional necessity overrides personal conviction. And this splitting of theological personality is serious because it degrades biblical truth. It becomes a precedent for treating the Church's teaching like mere house rules, maintained not only because they are intrinsically true, but for the sake of some extrinsic reason, such as custom or mere institutional necessity. Now, if the problem with Dr. Williams' theology was simply a combination of, incompetence and a lapse into false consciousness, as his critics imply, then we could take an early break. But that won't do, I'm afraid. The problem that he represents for Orthodox Anglicans is much deeper than that spurious distinction between the public and the personal, but it is a symptom. And this is where I think the threat to truth lies. It's characteristic of Dr. Williams' writing that he will outline what appear to be liberal and conservative alternatives, neither portrayed as particularly inviting, then offer us a third way, which seems to avoid the difficulties of both. A typical example is found in his essay, Is There a Christian Sexual Ethic?, where he concludes as follows: our main question about how to lead our sexual lives should be neither, am I keeping the rules, nor, am I being sincere and non-hurtful? It seems neither conservative or liberal. But, how much am I prepared for this to signify? It's at that point a certain mist might descend, possibly in some cases a red mist, but a mist begins to descend. And what I want to offer you this morning is, if you like, a hermeneutic proposal for understanding Rowan Williams and where he's going. Because in that sentence, in that setting of opposites and then a middle way, we find what I believe is an instinctive Hegelianism, where we're looking for a dialectically derived middle way. Thank you.
And you go on to say, there's a Canadian novelist that came up with the wonderful phrase that the meaning of the word chastity was having the body in the soul's keeping. Having the body in the soul's keeping. It's a phrase I really love because it says something about integrity, meaning what I do and doing what I mean. And if you assume that meaning is something that you're working at with other people, then you see that it's not just an individualistic ideal. So you're really driving this point home, that meaning is the most important thing. So it's entirely self-serving, really, because although you say meaning is something that you work out with other people, it isn't really true, is it? Because you won't accept that what your behaviour means to me is that you're a very abusive person. You won't accept that your astrophysical clergy friend, what that meant to me was that he was a very abusive person. All you're interested in is controlling me and bullying me to tell you that you're alright really, and that your behaviour was alright really, and that I've misunderstood it, when it clearly isn't the case. Otherwise you wouldn't have gone round behind my back so obsessively, lying your face off about me, and trying to destroy my life, and destroy me, and destroy everything that I did. You've got no explanation or excuse for why you've done these things that present you as a person who has any integrity or morality or anything like that. You're not a moral person, you're an amoral person, and as I've said, you've redefined morality just so that you can believe that you're a moral person. You accept neither traditional morality nor liberal morality. You've redefined it entirely so you can abuse anyone you want, you can abuse your position, and yet you can still believe yourself a moral person. And if traditionalists criticise you or liberals criticise you for your immoral behaviour, you just say that they're immoral or they're not getting it or something like that. When all the time you're gaslighting. It's just gaslighting, this Rowan. It's complete nonsense. It doesn't mean anything at all. It's total rubbish. Anyway, I'm going to play the clip of you saying these things, and then I'm going to make a final comment for this evening later on, and I'll make some more comments in another video.
So, I suppose one of the questions that we're always bound at some point to be asking, thinking about sexuality and sexual well-being, is, with any sexual activity, what do I mean by this? What do I actually want to say? You can imagine a somewhat cynical respondent saying, what I want to say is that I want sexual pleasure, and that's it. But the fact is that there is, as I've suggested, no way of completely disentangling what you do with another person from those issues around power, and therefore meaning. So what do I want to say? What do I mean here? And that suggests, of course, that ultimately sexual well-being is not just a matter of achieving a good physical equilibrium. It's about a particular kind of integrity, a particular kind of convergence between what I do and what I mean. Do I mean what I do? Is the question which I think in thinking about sexual well-being we have to factor in somewhere along the line. There's a Canadian novelist called Robertson Davis who came up many years ago with a wonderful phrase that the meaning of the word chastity was having the body in the soul's keeping. Having the body in the soul's keeping. It's a phrase I really love because it says something about integrity, something about meaning what I do and doing what I mean. And if you assume that meaning is always something you're working at with other people, then you see this is not just an individualist ideal.
So you go on to say, sexual ethics, certainly for a Christian, is, in spite of the impression we regularly give, not just about a set of prescriptions of things you do and don't do. It's also very deeply bound up with communication, because as anybody who's been to a religious marriage service will know, there's really quite a lot about what a relationship symbolises. And you go on to talk about how marriage represents the union between Christ and the church being regarded as the bride of Christ, beginning in New Testament literature. You actually later say that the bride of Christ is the world, but that isn't true, it's the church. But I had to laugh at this. Sexual ethics, certainly for a Christian, is, in spite of the impression we regularly give, not just about a set of prescriptions of things you do and don't do. Well, to be honest, it is really, Rowan. But as I've explained already, if you love God, then you want to behave in a way that's pleasing to God, in a way that's pleasing to someone that you love. So it's not fanatically keeping rules, as you tend to like to present it. If anyone wants to hold traditional values, it's because they're anxious and frantically keeping rules. It's not because they love God or they just want to behave in a way that they think is correct. It's not about that, it's because they're frantic. And anxious is a word that you use very often in relation to these things, but you're not using it here at the moment. So, traditional sexual ethics, as I've said, is that the only appropriate context for sex is within monogamous, heterosexual, lifelong marriage. But there are people who would define themselves as Christians who have more liberal views than that. But I don't know that I've heard any of those people even saying that it's okay to try and screw your ordinance. Especially when you're married already, and then try and destroy the person for decades and threaten to kill them. So even the most liberal person who would define themselves as Christian doesn't generally promote sexual violence and terrorism. So that's quite funny, really. You always present the keeping of rules as a negative thing, as if we ought not to be keeping rules. There's never any question as, are the rules good rules? And if they're good rules, then perhaps it would be a good idea to keep them. And Christianity is a revealed religion, so we tend to think that the rules are the things that God wants us to do, how God wants us to act. And if we love God, as I've said, we want to act in a way that's pleasing to God. And since God is all goodness, then the rules he would give would be good rules. So, I just don't know where you're coming from, apart from trying to justify yourself and denigrate people who do keep the rules, or who try to keep the rules, or think that the rules are important, or even people who have more liberal views but still don't think the bishop should be going round forcing himself on people. Anyway, I'll leave it there for this evening, and I might make another video tomorrow to talk about one or two other things that you said in this lecture. So have a nice week. You appear to be double booked on Tuesday, actually, with being in London and in Cambridge at the same moment in time. So I'm wondering if your purple cassock's going to be in London and your black cassock is going to be in Cambridge. And perhaps, you know, when I thought your cassock was changing colour in those videos, it was actually your alter ego in a different coloured cassock. So maybe it's not just a different coloured cassock, it's your alter ego, your purple alter and your black alter. And on Tuesday, one of them's going to be in London at St Paul's Cathedral, and one of them is going to be in the Faculty of Divinity in Cambridge, both at the same time. But since you're superior to the rest of humankind, then I'm sure this feat is possible for you anyway. So who knows where I might turn up to arrest you. So have a nice week. Hasta la próxima.
Sexual ethics, for certainly for a Christian, is, in spite of the impression we regularly give, not just about a prescription, a set of prescriptions of things you do and don't do. It's also very deeply bound up with communication. Because as anybody who's ever been to a religious marriage service will know, there's really quite a lot about what a relationship symbolises.